All right. Welcome, and welcome back from the fourth. I hope you all had a healthy and safe one. Certainly, our hearts go out to the folks in Texas for what awful tragedy went on there. Um, okay, so getting on into today, I'm going to make a quick note. We're going to do things a touch differently. I don't know if you saw the post, Phyllis, but I'm a little bit being facetious. We had this revolutionary idea that we would turn the cyber call audio into a podcast.
Yay, great idea.
um, so we had already hundreds of listeners since we posted the first one. So I'm going to do it a little differently. First, I'll just do some quick intros. Then, so everybody knows who's here. Then next, we'll go into a little bit of today's banter, which has to do with the Ingram Micro cyber attack, and then we'll get into today's special guest. I won't give that away just yet, although we'll intro him shortly right now. So, all right, so let's talk about who's here. I'm Andrew Morgan, host of the Cyber Call, joined as always with my co-host Phyllis Lee, VP of Content from CIS. Special guest co-host this week, I have Chris Lair, EVP of Solace, filling in, and perfect timing for us to talk about incidents. So Chris is here with us. One of my favorite all times is Chip Buck, co-founder and CTO of SaaS Alerts. Chip, thanks for joining. And then also many year friend and amazing MSP, CTO and managing partner of F12, Calvin Engen. Calvin, welcome. All right. Yeah, man. So let's talk a little bit about, first of all, the Ingram Micro incident. This has got to be on everyone's mind. It's obviously unfortunate in that, again, this is in our industry. It highlights two things from the Verizon DBIR this week. I'm sorry, from this year's DBIR, which are supply chain attacks doubling year over year. 15 to 30% of all incidents were supply chain attack related. Phil Langlois was on from Verizon, and we did talk about that. And the second thing is, again, what pushed vulnerabilities above phishing for the first time was the large number of VPN attacks. Again, now I will be clear, that is speculation from the Bleeping Computer article, where they supposedly have interviewed or spoken to some employees that this was via, a VPN compromise. I'll put the links in the chat. One link to Bleeping Computer, the other link to Ingram Micro's statement. We certainly will try and get Ingram Micro on for the following week, see if they'll join us. But let's just start off with this. First, we were talking offline. I know you're big fans of the branding here of the SafePay ransomware group.
I'm not sure fan is the right word, but the irony just put a chuckle in my throat.
Yeah. So you and I discuss cyber incidents week in and week out. One thing you've shared with me is that it's one of those things that you have to assume will all be compromised. You have to take that assumption. But as you've shared with me many times, it's not only how resilient are you, so how quickly can you get up and running, but then what's your comm strategy like? So Ingram's comm strategy was, fairly concise. It hasn't been updated since the 5th. Put yourself in their shoes, Chip. You're a publicly traded company. Right thing or wrong thing? What's your take on this so far?
I wouldn't say it's right. It's certainly right in the sense that they got out in front of it and did the minimum that they've got to do for SEC compliance. They were transparent that they have been, they've had a breach. They're dealing with the ransomware situation, and they haven't stepped beyond that at all. I think it's a little de minimis given the customers they serve are very tech industry focused. I would like to see someone senior come along and update this maybe, and not necessarily provide any details. You don't want to do that. But even if it's just, hey, it's now Monday morning, our last statement was Saturday, and here's where we're at. We absolutely know how this occurred and when this occurred. We're not going to provide details on that. We're still working through um, our negotiations, our conversation with the ransomware group, and we want to resolve this. So we don't want to share a lot of information, but know that our team is working full time on this, and we're going to come out of this whole and support our community the way we always have. I would do something like that. I would add more to it. There's an interesting trade off between not saying too much, and leaving too much room for too much silence, and then speculation grows. Like that makes it worse. So it's like any other PR exercise that you go through, whether it's politics or technology. You've got to communicate to people regularly enough so they feel confident. Otherwise, they just wonder. People start making stuff up. You make things up when there's a void and a vacuum. People fill it with their own ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, or they think you're hiding something. That's the other point. Yeah. So
Eric Sunt, you put a point about losing millions a day. Yeah, I did I searched SEC and their filings. They don't break out e-commerce, their digital versus their Xvantage versus their normal revenue. But I did some quick calculations, and it's millions. Several. It's I think the rough math I did, and I certainly wouldn't want to be quoted on it, but it's not trivial. So Chris, over to you. What I always want us as a community to get out of this is what we can learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because let's talk comm strategy, and what are your thoughts and advice for MSPs if they were, when they're in a situation like this. A comm strategy isn't something that you want to create post incident and try to figure out what and how and who's going to say it, correct? And because I've been in enough tabletops with you where you're like figuring out the who is a really important person, and a lot of times it's not who you would think it should be communicating, correct? Like there's a lot of emotions at stake and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think though there are some lessons to be learned, but this is a massive size company, so things are a lot different. I mean, they have internal PR, they probably have firms, they have existing relationships with a lot of organizations already, so it's a little bit different than, let's just say you're an MSP and you're having to go through this. Typically, in a situation when you're not a large company like this, you're going to lean heavily upon breach attorneys, and they have a very good, all the breach firms that are out there that are on a panel have very good command of comms. They have scripts and they have templates. So a lot of companies come to us and they go, hey, should we go ahead and try to, write up scripts and letters and email comm templates and everything like that? I'm like, no, because you can't account for every scenario, but you do need to have a process that you're going to understand who's going to do what, who's going to approve the comms, when the breach firm or whomever is involved tells you what you need to say or how you need to say it or whatever. So it's one of those things that it's going to be different. In these really large, I've been involved, nothing this size, but I've been involved in some that have in the tens of thousands of employees, but it's just not as global in scale. And the number of parties and entities you get involved just around comms gets pretty darn complicated. And so what I don't want people to do from a small to medium size base is overcomplicate things, because it'll make the situation worse. So just realize what you can accomplish and who you're probably going to have to communicate with. Typically, it's going to be your employees and your internal people first. It's going to be your key customers. In this case, they have a board, so you're going to have those types of things that you have to account for, and then go from there. But yes, I mean, the lesson learned is let the experts handle this type of stuff, and don't try to solve this problem when you're not a PR person.
But I think one takeaway I heard in there, Chris, though, is, hey, the breach counsel will have, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. A lot of us don't have breach counsel on retainer. We don't have breach counsel relationships. is that a takeaway? Maybe we should be talking to, what is it like to work with a breach counsel? Should we have somebody on speed dial? Should we have a relationship?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. So if you have cyber insurance, which I would expect everybody on this that is watching, listening to this does, they're going to have their breach firms on panel. And so you want to be familiar with those. Now, if you have a breach panel that's not on a breach firm that's not on panel, you can, upon signing up for your policy or renewing your policy, sometimes you can get them written in. But anyway, needless to say, let's just assume you do go with one of those that are on the panel. It is. I always recommend that you have a conversation, and typically those breach firms will do that for you, complimentary, and have that conversation with you just so you can get a good feel of how they're going to handle it, and they're going to give you some guidance and some tips of what you need to do.
Got it. So, Ann mentioned holiday weekend. I think Kelvin, this is almost 4 years to the day of the Kaseya incident. I think that was the 2021 July, 4th of July area. Don't hold me to the exact date, but it was somewhere in that time frame. So timing interesting that, again, we're dealing with people on holidays, not surprising. And this Safe Pay group, Chris and I were talking, Kelvin, 220 plus attacks in I think the last 12 months. This is a very active group, but as an MSP, if Ingram was your distie, are you quote unquote okay? Meaning, they acknowledge the attack. They've shared they're doing things to restore their systems. Are you okay with the limited amount of info you've gotten so far? Maybe play both sides right here, because as Chip said, you have to be cognizant of, especially these days, you're getting CISOs under literally going to jail for potentially saying the wrong thing. So it's certainly gotten people their dander up. But take it from the MSP side first.
Yeah, keep it simple. No, not okay. A lot of MSPs, hundreds and hundreds of them, rely on distie, like an Ingram Micro, to provide products and services to their customers. And without comms, you're left holding the bag. And so I can only imagine, the amount of pain that this creates across the industry as people are scrambling for orders that are in flight, orders that yet to get processed. And I think it's really important that you have an agnostic strategy as an organization so that you can pivot when an event like this happens. If you put all your chips into one organization and they fail you, it's not a matter of if, it's when. And here we are living in the when. So, I would say, yeah, comms are poor here. Like, for me as an organization, you want at least a regular update on a daily basis to understand where we at, how long is this going to last, how does that inform me now to make decisions on behalf of my customers that, that order that I don't know where it sits, I'm going to go and get it from another distie. I'm going to go process this and start really thinking around what that's going to take, because we don't know the extent of how long this is going to take to recover the systems to something that will be able to continue business as usual. So I'm certainly of the camp that more communication is better, even if it is just we're still working on it, and that's an important aspect.
Got it. So let's really appreciate all of your insight into this thus far. And Kelvin, as we get into here, you and I planned this session about, I was really so proud of you for all you continue to do. And, you just achieved your ISO 27001 certification, no small undertaking. One of the reasons, by the way, I have Chip here, because he is somebody that can firsthand talk about what it's like to go through this process. But how about a quick intro about who you are, what you do up there?
Sure.
And I'm pointing at the Canadian region. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks, Andrew, for having me on the cyber call. It's you know, I've always watched, long time listener, first time in the seat here. So, and you have an incredible group that you've put together to help just elevate, raising the bar of information available to the community. So, thank you for everyone on the panel here, and yourself to continuing just to keep the bar high. We're all better together. So. As for me, I'm Calvin Engen, Chief Technology Officer, Managing Partner for F12. Been with the business just over 19 years now, so pretty much grew up through the organization. I've done almost every technical role, but in this last little bit, I've really focused in on elevating the standard. And the only one that's going to push yourself is yourself, and so I really believed in how do we really increase our ability to deliver excellent operations, technology, cybersecurity, and ultimately a better client experience. And thankfully, I don't have to do that alone. I have an incredible team behind us here at F12 that helps just do that. And so, as it relates to ISO, it was just another step in the journey for us. And what I would say by that is there wasn't a customer that was demanding it, and it wasn't it wasn't because a checkbox was looking lonely. We really wanted to operationalize that trust in F12 and really harden that within our own business. And so, thankfully, along that journey, customers were like, "Oh, like we want ISO, we want you to have that. We're not going to come on unless you have it." And so it was really good timing in terms of that we could to really add that into our portfolio. But
Got it.
I would
So people did acknowledge it that you were doing it.
they did afterwards. Yeah, I it was we started SOC 2 Type 2 the attestation a decade ago. So like we're not disfamiliar with a lot of the frameworks and ways that we can really increase our service delivery. But this was SOC 2 is not a certification; it's just an attestation of your controls, and so you're only as good as the controls you put in. And so I've always really drove into our team here is that just because we put our control in there last year and we had it audited doesn't mean it should still stay that way. And so I'm always about that continuous improvement. And ISO 27001 is really about that continuous improvement now formalized in the operation. So you're continually adding that value. And so otherwise you could have a static control list for SOC 2 for a decade and it'd be the same thing that you started with. And what's the value in doing that? How do you actually improve your operation if you're not taking that level of scrutiny?
Yeah, very cool. Chip, one question to you before we hand it to Phyllis. Now, people may not understand, like, oh, well, SAS Alerts is big. They're part of Kaseya. You got your ISO 20. You did it with a very small team before you were part of Kaseya. So I want to make sure we highlight that in the question where people are like, oh, this ISO, I could never do ISO 27001. And so that being number one, but as someone that's personally gone through this certification process, can you share some insight on the amount of work, the effort, right, the dedication that Calvin's team went through for this?
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean, it's interesting to hear Calvin, um, take us through the journey of how F12 has done this, starting with a SOC 2 10 years ago or more. I think that's a really common place that people start because you're just getting into the process of building process. But he's absolutely right that a SOC 2, some people, when we first did ours, not even SAS alerts, but prior to that, the first one I went through, we just picked a standard off the shelf, right? We picked COVID. We said, okay, this looks good. We're going to try and model ourselves around COVID, and we'll use that as our SOC 2 baseline. As Calvin points out, companies don't have to do that. They can just basically write up their own processes, and the auditor's job is to come in and say, yeah, you're doing what you say you're going to do. Even if that process is, we keep all of our passwords on an Excel spreadsheet that we print out and put in a safe. Like that's actually an acceptable SOC 2 process. So you've heard me advocate in the past, Andrew, that as businesses mature, um, businesses particularly that are IT service providers, they need to move toward something that is an independent objective standard. And that's what ISO is. You've heard me advocate this many, many times, Andrew. I think it's something that all MSPs should be pursuing, even if it's a two-man shop that's just starting out, almost especially if it's a two-man shop just starting out. If you expect to grow, it's actually easier to implement all of these policies to build yourselves into a standards-driven company when you're small. I think very few businesses do that. So they wind up staring down the barrel of what they think of as this gigantic structure of the ISO standard itself, and wondering, oh my God, how are we going to do this with all the other things that we have to do? It's a lot of work, no matter how you cut it. I'm going to take a stab at this and say, even with the other certifications that I know F12 has, obviously SOC 2, GDPR, Canada standard, they still put in hundreds of hours of work to bring the ISO framework, reorganize some of the ways that they write about and practice their policies. And when I say write about, I mean document them. And it's still a team effort that requires, interdisciplinary cooperation from lots of different departments to get it done. Because ISO is touching everything. It's everything from how you hire to how you offboard and everything in between. And again, it's not, oh, well, we just get to do it the way we want and document it. It's no, you have to do it this way. And that's, to me, is a much more structured standard. You've heard me use this phrase before. I still think it's the gold standard of information systems management frameworks. Andrew, in private conversations, you've heard me say, like, everything else is alphabet soup. It just comes along and somebody else cooks it up and says, oh, we're going to create a special standard just for this industry. If you have an ISO, in my mind, you've got my confidence as someone I'm going to do business with, that you're protecting my information, that you've got solid controls in place for everything from personnel to your actual tech stack and how you manage it all. Business continuity planning, everything that we all talk about, we're preaching all the time to MSPs. You build that ISO framework out, you follow it, you work toward that audit, you put yourself in a whole new class as an MSP.
Yeah, Andrew, I'll add into this because I went through this at a bank that I worked at prior, and it is a lot of work, no doubt. It takes a lot of focus, and it takes a lot of, everybody's got to be on board. It's something that you can't half-ass at all. But to Chip's point, what we encountered was at the bank, we had different auditors and regulators come in, throughout the year. And whether it was an auditor or regulator, they would say, hey, you need to do it this way. And then the next guy would come in and say, no, I don't like it this way. You got to do it this way. And so my boss at the time, I give him credit, Lenny Smith, he's like, hey, I'm tired of doing this. We're going to go ISO 27001. It's the right way to do it. And they can't tell us we're doing it the wrong way or whatever. It basically takes their opinion and their subjectivity out of it. And it worked. It worked. And it definitely helped us prepare. We were going to be acquired in the future, and it helped us with that immensely. We were a public, we were a NASDAQ bank at the time, and we were being acquired by another publicly traded bank. So there's a tremendous amount of value, and but you get what you get out of it, what you put into it, and it's truly one of those. You put forth the effort, it does have the value, but you better be ready to commit.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah, go ahead. Go, Kelvin.
I was just going to say, Chris, that gives me PTSD. Our auditors changing on our SOC 2 was like, hey, we had this control, but now it's all of a sudden a different interpretation of that control. So, after a decade, it became actually part of our normalcy. We said, actually, let's have a different perspective every year. Because at first it was like, oh, this is really annoying. But it actually helped improve us because we said, okay, well, that's a good perspective. How do we actually address that perspective of the interpretation of that control? But that's the challenge with a SOC 2 is it's only as good as the auditor's interpretation of the control, whether you met those needs. And so, I echo that, but certainly I feel the challenge of auditor's perspective on a control for sure.
Very cool. So Phyllis, I know you're a big fan of Lenny, and probably go way back with Chris, but as Brian Blakely likes to say, compliance is rolling downhill. So for MSPs out there that are like, why should we do this? things are fine, this, that, and the other. As I always like to say, look at your contracts, look at who supplies your largest amount of revenue, and does the possibility exist that they or their customer might say, hey, these are the security requirements and standards we need for you to continue to do business with us. So with that, Phyllis, let me let you take over from here and ask Calvin some questions.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's been a good discussion so far. So, Calvin, as we all know, it takes a lot of resources and money to become ISO certified, and it takes the whole team. So, how is it that F12 decided as an organization? Like, how did you get buy-in that this is the way we're going to go? Everyone, it's all hands on deck. This is how much, and we're willing to make the investment.
Yeah, that was challenging. Usually I can get, I would say almost a blank check on certifications as I go after a number of different ones. But they were a lot smaller, and so the checks were a lot smaller. When we started looking at the ISO, what it was going to take to do, that was a much greater amount. 6 figures is what we're talking about, and so the business wasn't ready for it. When I proposed it in our strat planning session 2 years ago, it was like we're just not quite ready for that just yet, and so I had to advocate of what it was going to take, set our teams up so that we're able to take on that work without impacting other projects that we had in the pipeline. And so we were able to gain budget for the fiscal year of 25, and was able to fast track it. But we did a little bit of that work up front, so we could be much quicker in terms of our turnaround time. So it was kind of like, okay, we're not going to maybe buy the audit, but we are going to start doing some of the work towards that outcome. But it did take a lot of advocacy, a lot of the why, and also the business to be in a right spot. So as we start to look at more international business, that we were prepared to be able to say, hey, we're going to come in, but we're also going to be at a level that's going to give a trust aspect to the operation, as it's not just Calvin saying we're going to do this and we're going to get this great certificate at the end. It was the organization rallying behind that outcome.
So you said you did some prep work to get ready. So what was the first step to trying to get ISO certified?
Yeah, well, what I'm going to say is that ISO 27001 is not a walk in the park, unless that park was full of policy documents, asset registers, and internal audits. But no, it really took us. We started with a gap assessment. This was really to understand, what are the overlaps that we're seeing in our SOC 2 practice. How does that correspond to how those controls are interpreted, and where's the gaps? And we had a lot actually compared to it. But there wasn't as many overlaps as I thought, and so this really became an ability to start saying, okay, let's look at all the things that we're doing, and we're doing a lot. The challenge with an ISO though is that you need to document it, and you have to enforce it, and so that became a component where we really needed to drive in to operationalizing what we were doing in a formal way, whether that's policies, controls, and training. But I would say the gap assessment was the fundamental starting point for us.
So did you download the ISO spec first and then read it over? When you say you did gap assessment, was it against the ISO and you guys interpreted and you guys did that on your own?
Yeah, we did that first, and then we were like, well, that's not really what's going to give us the way. And so probably several years ago, we looked at a GRC platform. Tugboat is the one that we landed on now, OneTrust. So that really gave us the ability to start to manage the policies appropriately and then create the appropriate integrations. And so that a platform like that is really good, because then it can help as you're looking at your certification journey or whatever journey you're looking on. Is if you have one, you don't have to redo a lot of the work. because now you can start to have those overlaps, and you can really create a comprehensive way of managing the controls, the policies, and all the work associated with um, um, grabbing the evidence required for the auditors. And so it actually shortens the amount of time dramatically once you have that rolling through a GRC platform.
Can I ask something real quick here, Phyllis?
Yeah.
So Clint puts in there. I'll leave the CREST accreditation on the controls in a minute, but Kelvin, if you were, let's just say, dealing with a lot of, CMMC customers, would you have attacked that first over ISO if you had, you had to have level 2 type certification? And do you see in your GRC platform, is there overlap here that you could apply if you're like, hey, well, we do need level 2 and this is going to get us a lot of the way? Is there any leverage of what you did?
Well, for us, you want to meet where the customer's demand is at, right? So if you're required to be in a CMMC level 2, and that is really, otherwise you're going to lose your customers in a certain amount of time, then that's where you focus. From our perspective, we didn't have that requirement on us, and so we really looked at where do we want to be in the market. What is it going to take to be in that segment of the market? And ISO was that for us. Now, that being said, our very next certification is CMMC level 2, or I think it's called the Canadian Program for Cybersecurity Certification for the Canadian variant. And so really what we're focused in on is, where do we need to be next? So be ahead of the curve. But I know a lot of us are starting behind the curve in many cases. And so I wouldn't say that the ISO is one that you should do if your customers are demanding you get CMMC level 2. Like, there's overlap, but not enough to be significant, where I'd say go do that instead of this.
Okay, very good. And then Phyllis, just real quick on, CIS accreditation from CREST. It's almost like an apple and an orange here when we're talking about, an ISO versus a CIS accreditation.
Yeah,
Fair?
I mean, an ISO accreditation is, mandatory to do business with some organizations, and it is very comprehensive, right? So CIS critical security controls are not going to be as comprehensive. It's not about business continuity, right? The CIS critical security controls are really about, hey, these are the controls and policies you should be implementing to defend against top threats, right? And it's very cyber focused. And so certification for CIS controls really is about, hey, I can implement these controls and I can consult on these controls and show proficiency in these controls to defend against top threats, which has its role. And certainly there's overlap between controls and ISO controls and CMMC. But those, those other certifications are if you want to do business with certain sectors or certain parts of the industry, then you should definitely get those certifications. I will say here in the US quickly, there are those safe harbor laws that we've talked about, and those point to CIS controls, ISO, and NIST.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Phyllis, if you were kind of stratifying Clint, like you had a customer, they weren't regulated, they were in Connecticut, they really want a good cyber program, they want indemnification, as Phyllis said, they want safe harbor. CIS is probably your way to go. It's a very, strong roadmap. So thanks for going through that.
Yeah, sure. No problem. My last question before I hand it over to Chip is, what surprised you most about trying to get ISO certification, like good or bad?
I humbly say that I thought it was going to be more difficult. And what I mean by that is, it was a scary thought as an endeavor. I knew we could do it, don't get me wrong. But when I thought about ISO, it had this prestige and this this difficulty that I thought was associated with it. But the fact that we had such a mature practice already gave me a lot more solace when we started going through the process, and our team members was going through it and don't get me wrong, there was things that we needed to change. There was things that we needed to do, but it was really getting to that common language set that the auditors were using, and the validation, and to suddenly realize, oh, we're actually doing a lot of these things. We just have to really create those procedures, those meetings, those outcomes, and document it. And so um, it was surprising to me going through that we were able to move much quicker through the process, because when we really kind of put rubber to the road, we turned it around in about 4 months.
That's
When
good.
we really started driving towards the outcome.
Mhm.
But I would say that's not going to be the journey for everybody.
Right.
I would say the fact that we had a lot of the things already in place was just a result of the decade history of doing these in a continuous improvement model. But I would say on average, it would be an 18-month endeavor if you're starting from the ground floor, where you have a lot of technical debt. You gotta implement a lot of these controls, and if you haven't, it's going to take some time without some dedicated resources. And I know a lot of MSPs don't have a full GRC officer just focusing on it. You're going to have to do it off the side of the desk and keep business running, all the while doing something that's a pretty heavy lift for most.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's it's a good lesson learned. Sometimes we're more intimidated by something, and just getting started, you're like, oh, it's not as bad as I thought. But also, if you don't have that as a part of your practice, having these policies in place, having the discipline and those processes in place, and it will be longer for you. I will hand it over to Chip.
Yeah, and
Thanks, Phyllis.
as it goes, Phyllis, maybe just take a look at Steve's question on CIS again versus the two. If you could maybe help him in there, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can't get to I can't chat. That's the problem.
If you throw it in private chat, I'll respond it.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Go ahead, Chip.
So, Calvin, Phyllis asked when she began, kind of how you brought the management team along with this. F12 is a big organization, offices all across Canada. There's a lot of boots on the ground. What was the impact, reaction, cooperation level you needed from, sort of the frontline folks in the organization, that they have to support the effort. They don't necessarily have to be in the grind of all the documentation, everything else, but the troops kind of have to rally to achieve this kind of a milestone. How did you find that? How
Yeah.
did you find it
So
went, and what did you use to rally the troops?
yeah. So one, you start with leadership. That fundamentally was the first component. So as we go deeper into some of the operational departments, there's already a buy-in from their executive leader that we're doing these things, these outcomes, and here's the benefit that we'll see as a result. So it always starts with leadership, is how I would describe that. In terms of some of the more like the brass tacks, as it were, around some of the core components, like um, you know, I almost shamefully say, restricting access back down to the technicians so that the PCs that they're using don't have admin rights was one of the more difficult challenges that we had to overcome, as just the frontline staff having to uh, go right down to basic user access. And we had to really come up with a solution so we weren't impacting their job. And of course, they made all the excuses in the world on why this was going to impact their job. But we came up with a pretty elegant solution to be able to give them the access they need when they need it, when they're in front of customers. And because we wanted to ensure that we could find that balance between security and usability within the platform. We're over 400 staff, so finding that nuance. There's always an opinion of a piece of software that needs to be used, because that was one of the other components of your ISO, is you have to have an approved software list. You have to have a methodology to approve that software list and to ensure that it's within the asset registrar. So just even getting that down to an approval strategy to say, okay, why are we using this? Do we need to use it? Do we have an alternative? Do we need to get everyone on that alternative, etc.? That was probably more time consuming than I would have thought. But as we all know, technical staff have an opinion, and they'll voice it. So we had to really work through what that looks like. But thankfully, I think we took a pragmatic approach. We said, hey, we're not opposed to using different technologies and testing it, but give them an environment to do it in, not on the corporate assets, where often they were using those as test beds. So we really created that safe area to do that with some control, oversight, and governance.
Makes sense. Andrew?
So for those that are like heard Calvin go, yeah, we're a 400 person MSP, and go, yeah, that's easy for you to do it ISO, quote unquote. Can you give a sense?
I felt it was harder. It was harder to do.
Yeah.
I
But
mean, Andrew, I would agree with that. You know, when we went through ISO at Sazler's, we started that process at about 32 employees.
well, that's
And
where I wanted to just give the sense to the
Yep.
audience of, oh well, they're 400, you're 32. So that's all I just wanted to share with everybody, that it's just because you're 400 employees, and as Calvin said, well, maybe it was more challenging because they had to deal with so much, whereas you were suggesting maybe it's a lot easier the smaller you are. So
I don't know if it's a lot easier, but I think it's certainly easier to herd the cats, you know, in the sense that you don't have as many you don't have as much diversity of opinion, and also people who have just developed their own way of doing something, right? In a large organization, you got people, can have people that get very, very specialized in doing things their own way. And now you're coming along and telling them, you know, we understand this has worked great for you and you serve our customers well, but we can't maintain what you're doing as a process organization wide. And we want to continue to grow as an organization and grow safely. So we've got to actually ask you to unlearn what you've learned, to give up on your special way of doing something, and to run with the rest of the pack. That's way harder to do at 400 people than it is at 30 something.
got it.
So would you say that it would be cheaper too for a smaller organization to be ISO certified, or should everyone prepare themselves for like at least a 6-figure price tag?
No, we did it for far less than 6-figure. And again, you know, we at the very outset, and I saw Chris nodding along when he made this comment earlier. If you're a brand new startup MSP, go spend the money to get the ISO standard and put it on your desk. And this, you know, a lot of tech people are gearheads, or you know, they've got other hobbies. This is like taking apart a car. Like, you've got that hobby and you just going piece by piece. If you're disciplined about it and you're doing a little bit of it every day, you discover a couple of things. Number one, you actually wake up a month later, 2 months later, and you go, oh my gosh, I'm a lot farther closer to my goal here than I thought it would have been. And you also start to see how the framework comes together, how the different control groups and controls interweave and support each other. Like, you know, we could run down a rabbit hole with that, but it becomes easier and easier to advance the more you do it. It's one of those things, like, you know, there's so many cliches, right? You climb the tallest mountain is 1 foot after the other, all that stuff. But it really is true. And I think a smaller organization, has a much bigger benefit by getting there, because Calvin's organization is already pretty mature with a lot of certifications, which made this rational for them to move forward. You're starting from absolute scratch. You can start working on ISO while you do CMC at the same time. There's a lot of overlap and support between those different standards that you're working toward. But let me jump into a couple other things with Calvin. Let's go back to the controls for a second. So for you guys at your size, you know, was there a specific control group or a specific controller policy that you felt, you know, either took the most effort to push or provided the best payback? And I know what this was for Sazler, so I'll be happy to answer for us. But I'd love to see if you've got anything in particular about the ISO standard that jumped out at you that really helped.
Yeah, there's probably, I would say there was two. There was the data classification component is an area of our SOC 2 control that was never really matured to enforce. And so, well, we had like a policy. ISO was all about the enforcement of said policy, and so like data labeling, enforcement, how that goes out of the organization. It was an area that I was like, oh, we have this, but the implementation wasn't satisfactory based off of what the control was. And so, and this is relatively simple, but I think the challenge is if you can't enforce policy and you can't measure the enforcement of that policy, now you really have a gap in terms of the ability to say, hey, did this leave the organization? Did it leave with the right conditions set on it based on the controls you've set? And so that was an area that I was like, oh, that was surprising. But absolutely see the value in driving that through the organization. The second one would have been around our meeting cadence around our risk registrar and how we implement that through the organization. So before we do our risk assessments, and that would be within the security team, the IT team, our cloud services team, and so it was really kind of insulated from the rest of the operations. And so for the first time, this is where we actually brought in our operations COO. We brought in our DevOps director, and then we had IT. And so this really started to bring in those core leadership capabilities to talk through some of these gaps that we had. So if we needed to enforce additional policies on the front lines, like our data transportation policy on how we're encrypting that data in transit, how we're making sure that, point A to point B, you're not stopping at the local bar with that data, enforcing that we're not leaving that data potentially in the hands where that could get misplaced or all of a sudden grow legs. But I think what I really would zero in on is making sure that there was operational governance now at every layer of the business. And so that became so imperative so that we can ensure that they have visibility and we can enforce on whatever the risk is that we have in the organization and getting to that cadence. So that's been very valuable.
Yep, makes sense. So from an operational perspective, has this given you more confidence as a CTO in things like incident management, business continuity planning? Do you sleep better at night you're not the compliance officer necessarily. I assume a company your size, you have a full-time compliance officer that's part of this program. But are you sleeping better at night as the CTO as a result of this?
I have 4 young children, so I don't sleep well for the best of times. But for some of these areas of risk, certainly it helps. I would say, I think my own paranoia and knowing what's happening out there, it helps me feel like we're rising the tide, raising the bar in terms of our ability. But I don't feel like we've arrived, and I think that's the challenge in cybersecurity. There isn't
There's no
a
end point.
destination you can end at. It is continuous, and so just ensuring that you have all those gaps. I feel like we have a great team. We're looking at the right things, and we have the capability to respond, and we test those recovery plans at a degree that we know we can have resilience. But pragmatically, I'd say I don't. I always feel anxious. I always feel like, is there something else that we're missing that we haven't thought of? Is there's something else we ought to be doing to stay ahead of the curve? Because just as we get to a spot where we feel safe and secure, the game changes, the tactics, the techniques change, and we're left, scrambling, and the whatever the event is, it's like, next vulnerability, something we didn't see now becomes another risk point, and it's just shortening those times where we can say, hey, event happens, and we're able to respond and tighten that as close as possible so that we're not leaving ourselves open to exposure and victimization. So short answer, no.
I'm sorry. So last question. When we went through ISO, we made that decision almost within months of us starting up that we were going to build ourselves this way. And one of the impacts that it had for SaaSalert, since we were a startup small company, was immediate credibility in the marketplace with customers. It made it much easier for us to
Yeah.
have customer conversations about them feeling good about us. Does that apply to MSPs in general, do you think, versus, we're a software company, and did you feel that kind of impact and sort of a shift in the go-to-market motion and how your account managers and NCA team, how they can approach customers? Like, do they go out there wearing that badge like, hey, we're ISO
Yeah.
certified?
Well, so early days, like we're only a month in, so we're new on the street as it relates to ISO. But I can say that the team was very well aware that we were undergoing our ISO certification, and they knew what our timeline was, and so they were already teasing it, saying, "Hey, we're upcoming ISO 27001." So they were already trying to get ahead of that marketing side. Um, I would say, because we weren't doing it for customers at the start, we knew it was for the potential of the new customers. Um, but we did, along the journey, have a customer that came to us and said, "Hey, we're ISO 27001. We need all of our suppliers to be 27001." And so we had it written in our contract. We had to get it for this date. And when we obtained it, it was like you arrived to a you know event, and it was like everyone else in that same room has been there and knows what it took to get there. And so when we had that conversation that we had the ISO, they were like, "Wow, like you've arrived. We know how much work that takes. We understand what you went through because we go through it ourselves." And there's a common language and an acceptance of that trust. And so when seeing that firsthand was a little unique. It was never with a SOC 2 was it the same way. But with a ISO, it was like, no, this is a different level that you come in at. So I do believe, though, that having the ISO, having that will reduce the amount of vendor questionnaires. I don't think it will eliminate, because there's always another question to be asked. But I do think it will drive deeper relationships with our customers that need it, and so they can rest knowing that we have something that can live up to some of these requirements.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I'd emphasize that I think that applies to the smaller MSPs as well. You don't have to be a 400 person
Yeah,
MSP for this to help your overall go to market efforts and give you more credibility. And honestly, even if you have to invest six digits and 18 months worth of time to get there, A, it's not going to be $100,000 up front, but B, the
no,
journey is going to pay off for itself, and the certification is going to give you credibility that opens up markets. But congrats, Calvin. I know it's a ton of work.
yeah,
Welcome to
thank
the
you.
club.
Thank you, Chip.
Chris, I know you're going to ask Calvin some questions, but I'd like to start
Okay.
off asking maybe both of you the same question. Like, you've confirmed it's a VPN. We see this almost regularly now, right? We know it was one of the top things in the Verizon data breach report. When do we hit the point of VPNs being like, this is tech debt, that we need to get into a single packet authorization, ZTNA solution, and start putting a line in the sand? Because I mean, it's no shock where threat actors are going, right? Maybe starting with you, Calvin, on this one.
Yeah, I think how many events do we need to move the needle? And I think the challenge is always familiarity. I've always done it this way. This is the way I do it. I don't want to put MFA on my VPN. What? No, you can't be a customer. We're going to change this today. I, I think this is the challenge that we are faced with, is having the courage to be able to say no as an MSP. It's to say, this is not okay. We know what the risk is, and we're gonna say, let's move you to this solution, whatever that might look like, whether it's a ZTNA, whether it's something else all entirely different. And I think it's drawing that line in the sand to say, hey, we're gonna at least start here as our standards for our customer and our service delivery, because we know we don't want to be in a position where that this is going to cause us organizational challenges to remediate when an event like this happens. Because when an event, an incident happens with a customer, how much of a drain on the technical resources in your company it takes to get them back up. And you've been talking to them about all that technical debt for ages, and they haven't made the move. It's really starting to take that and say, no, we're informing you that this is happening, or we're informing you this is happening, and your choice is A, get in line, or we can recommend you to a great MSP down the road that might take you on. And I hate that because it's just shifting it to somebody else to manage, but I ultimately think it's having the courage, and most customers trust that.
And are they such a great MSP if they will allow the customer to continue to operate that way?
Exactly. Good,
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah, I mean, I would add on here. Now, I have seen some, and I don't think it could be that much of a secret that in this particular situation with Ingram, they did not have MFA on their VPN. Now, whether or not we'll hear the whole story behind this, that's to be determined. Like, was there even a need for VPN? I mean, how many people even had that need, right? I mean, when you start to look at ZTNA and anything of that nature, you start to look at the business need, and you start to think about, hey, because this happened right when COVID hit. Everybody said blah blah blah, and I was like, do your people really need? What do they need to work? And a lot of times they didn't need VPN to work. They just needed email and maybe a couple of other things. So you didn't have to give them full blown VPN. So it makes you wonder, like, how many people throughout the Ingram universe had this? Why did they have it? What did they have access to? Was it overkill? Was it under? I mean, there's so many questions to be asked in this particular situation. Now, I do believe, Calvin said right. I mean, what you do have to draw a very firm line in the sand with your clients and say, this is just not going to happen. You're just not going to operate this way. It's just not smart. I mean, hopefully the customer goes, well, hell, Ingram didn't have MFA, so why should I? I don't think they're smarter.
Well, the Colonial did they say Colonial Pipeline didn't, and that was our reason?
Yeah, exactly. No, you're exactly right.
But you know what?
Star Warner awards here.
Yeah.
Here we are. We're talking about ISO. Great. I've arrived at this certification. Ingram Micro had ISO 27001.
Yep.
So the challenge is like ISO isn't going to give you the thing that's going to stop everything from happening. And in fact, your implementation of that practice in your organization doesn't mean anything unless you're actively working those risk registrars down. You're making it part of the procedure. You're identifying that technical debt, and you're taking action with courage. And I mean, a multi-billion-dollar company like Ingram, I could imagine they had a tremendous amount of technical debt that they had to overcome. And so systematically going through and saying, hey, how are we prioritizing this? And I'm sure there was a lot of information to get through. But this is why, when Chip says, do your ISO, as a 10-person company, just do it early. Because once you make it part of your culture, you make it part of your journey, your day in, day out. Now you have something really as a credible asset to the organization that elevates every conversation that you have with customers, with vendors, with your employees, because it's about the mindset. It's about the methodology of that framework coming to fruition through action. So I think, Ingram will have, I'm sure, lots to learn from this, but we can also take the opportunity to learn for what we ought to be doing and really put into practice.
The net, and Chris, I'll leave you with one question for Calvin, is this all comes back to business impact analysis, right? Really having business-led conversations, because that's where we would have figured this out. Well, you said, does everybody need it, Chris? Why do they need it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
No, you're exactly right. I mean, I was just thinking about just the change management side. Think about it, just put yourself in the shoes of Ingram. If you're going to roll out CTNA, that's not going to happen overnight. So, they might be in the process of doing that, but they might be 20% of the way through, which is thousands of people, right? So it's just, it's kind of a crazy thing. So, I mean, it puts things in perspective to say, hey, you don't, things, you have to climb a mountain there. So my question to Calvin is, I'm going to go a little bit off script, is like, now you put, this, you already a mature organization. You said that's made 27001, probably made it an easier process because you were that way. How do you put these good processes in place, but still allow your business to continue to be agile and responsive and be able to do the things you need to do without having maybe something like this slow it down to where it hurts the business?
Well, that is the dance we have to dance every other day. is, the security component versus usability. And, I would say ISO is a framework, not a straitjacket, right? It's really about a methodology to stay agile, in my opinion, if you use it as such, with some governance over that. And so, some examples is, when we add new, tools into our stack, there's a vendor review process. It's to ensure that we're not letting something in that's not going to work for us or our customers, and put our customers at risk, or our company at risk. And so, thankfully, we can kind of erase some of that shadow IT that occurs, because with change management, with governance, with segregation of duties, I think is very important within the organization. So the person buying isn't the one implementing. And then there's a clear line of what those components are, and the why behind it. It really creates a much more agile practice. And I know that you're like, oh, but there's a whole bunch of rules and things you have to follow. Yes, but then you can ensure quality. You can ensure the right outcomes, and that changes the ability for you to deliver on services. And what I would say, even ahead of that, is that once you start taking those methodologies, they can actually creep into the other operational aspects of like a PMO, of that's a project management office, right? To ensure that you're delivering on what you say you're delivering, with a security aspect in mind as part of that delivery. So for me, it's really it's about the clarity and accountability that needs to exist within the organization, so that way you can deliver on what you say you're doing. Because otherwise you're just doing a bunch of things, and then you're picking up the mess on the other side when shit breaks. And now you have to, get in front of customers, get in front of vendors, maybe, do press releases because something failed that wasn't kind of really thought through that process. So I would say it empowers than it as opposed to it just being like a hard no every time, right? And it's about how do we think this through from a security context and really empower the organization to be successful. That's how I view it.
Hey, thanks, Calvin.
So, gosh, that flew, and it was awesome. Can't believe we have to wrap it up already. I would have liked to keep going. Yeah, exactly. Calvin, you probably have a 2 o'clock Eastern you got to get to. So let me wrap it up for everybody. First off, Calvin, thank you for being our guest, for coming on. It was fantastic. Chip, really appreciate you coming on as a guest co-host and adding such colorful perspective on many areas of today's conversation. And Chris, likewise, as always, love having you coming on, and often not at the most glorifying times to talk about things, but always colorful and very important. So to that end, we'll see you all next Thursday. Be safe, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.
Thanks.